In 1816, the eruption of Mount Tambora triggered what historians call the year without a summer. Crops failed across the northern hemisphere. Famine spread through Europe and North America. By official accounts, populations were declining, economies were contracting, and societies were struggling to survive. Yet in that same decade, construction began on infrastructure projects of staggering scale. The Erie Canal broke ground in 1817, 363 miles of engineered waterway connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic. The project required moving 6.8 million cubic yards of earth. It employed thousands of workers in a region where, according to census data, the total population barely justified a single major road. The canal's capacity at completion could move 2,000 tons per vessel. In 1825, when it opened, there weren't enough goods in western New York to fill a tenth of that capacity on any given day. The timing alone creates friction. But the pattern extends further. Before we continue, a necessary acknowledgement. This documentary examines architectural and infrastructural patterns that have sparked intense online debate. We're not here to validate or debunk any particular theory. We're here to look at what was built, when it was built, and what the official historical record says about why. The observations stand on their own. The interpretations remain open. The conventional explanation holds that these projects were built with future growth in mind, that visionary leaders and investors gambled on expansion that would eventually justify the investment. This explanation appears in every textbook, every historical analysis, every academic paper on 19th century American development. And on paper it makes sense. Except when you look at the actual construction timelines, the actual population figures, and the actual economic conditions of the period, something begins to feel misaligned. Take the Rideau Canal in Canada. Construction started in 1826, just as the region was recovering from post-war economic depression. The system spans 126 miles and includes 47 locks, each built with precision stone masonry. The official purpose: military defense and transport between Montreal and Lake Ontario. The engineering specifications call for vessels carrying 100 tons. In 1832, when construction finished, the entire region it served had fewer than 15,000 permanent residents. Most were subsistence farmers. The annual commercial traffic projections used to justify the canal's budget assumed trade volumes that wouldn't materialize for another 40 years. The same pattern appears in Britain. Between 1830 and 1850, the United Kingdom constructed over 6,000 miles of railway track. The official narrative credits this to the Industrial Revolution. Factories needed to move goods, cities needed to move people, and rail was the answer. But when you examine the actual installation sequence, something doesn't align. Railways reached rural Scottish Highlands in 1843. The population density was 7 people per square mile. There were no factories, no significant mining operations, no commercial agriculture at scale. The trains ran nearly empty for decades. Yet the infrastructure itself, the grading, the bridges, the stations, was built to specifications that could handle 10 times the actual traffic. In 1848, the Great Western Railway completed a line from London to Penzance, a route serving fishing villages and farmland. The track gauge was 7 feet, wider than standard, requiring custom-built locomotives and rolling stock. The stations along the route featured Gothic Revival architecture with vaulted ceilings, ornate ironwork, and platform capacity for crowds that didn't exist. Several of these stations remain. You can stand in them today and feel the emptiness, platforms built for hundreds serving dozens. The conventional explanation again cites optimism, forward-thinking development, investment in future growth. But consider the financial context. The Panic of 1837 crashed the American economy. Banks failed. Credit vanished. Currency became worthless in many regions. Unemployment in eastern cities reached 25%. Immigration slowed to a trickle. And yet, during this exact period, States issued bonds to fund canal expansions, railway construction, and public works projects that wouldn't see profitable use for generations. Pennsylvania authorized $40 million in infrastructure bonds between 1835 and 1842, this in a state with a total GDP estimated at less than $200 million. The money funded the main line of public works, a system connecting Philadelphia to Pittsburgh through a combination of canals, railways, and inclined planes. When it opened in 1834, freight traffic was so light that toll revenues covered less than 8% of operating costs. The infrastructure existed. The demand didn't. This wasn't isolated. Massachusetts, New York, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, all followed similar patterns. Large-scale infrastructure projects launched during economic downturns, serving populations too small to justify them, built to specifications exceeding any reasonable projection of future need. And the construction itself raises questions. The Croton Aqueduct in New York, completed in 1842, stretches 41 miles and includes a bridge spanning the Harlem River with 15 arches, each 80 feet tall. The aqueduct delivered 90 million gallons of water per day to a city whose population at the time was 300,000, roughly 300 gallons per person per day, 10 times typical consumption even by modern standards. The official explanation, planning for growth. But the engineering tolerances tell a different story. The masonry work shows precision-cut stone fitted without mortar in many sections. The grade maintains a consistent 13 inches per mile across the entire length, a level of accuracy that shouldn't have been achievable with the surveying tools officially available in 1837. Several modern engineers who've studied the structure have noted that the design incorporates stress distribution techniques not formally documented in Western engineering manuals until the 1860s. These aren't secrets. They're published observations in civil engineering journals. They simply don't receive much attention because they don't fit comfortably into established narratives. So we're left with a pattern. Infrastructure built during economic hardship, sized for populations that didn't exist, engineered with precision that seems inconsistent with the technology officially available, and justified by projections that wouldn't prove accurate for half a century or more. The question isn't whether this happened. The evidence is architectural, financial, and demographic. It's in the historical record. The question is what explains the pattern, and why it appears with such consistency across multiple countries, multiple types of infrastructure, and multiple decades. The pattern becomes harder to dismiss when you track it across the Atlantic and watch it repeat with almost mechanical precision. In the United States, the infrastructure boom followed a specific sequence. Canals first, then railways, then urban water systems, then electrical grids. Each wave arrived before the demand that would eventually justify it. And each wave carried the same characteristic: over-engineering. The term itself is worth examining. In modern project management, over-engineering means building beyond specifications, adding capacity, redundancy, or structural integrity that exceeds requirements. It's generally considered wasteful. Engineers are trained to optimize, to build exactly what's needed and no more. Yet 19th century infrastructure in both America and Britain was systematically over-engineered by modern standards. Consider the Union Station in Worcester, Massachusetts, completed in 1911. The city's population was 145,000. The station was designed to handle 30,000 passengers daily, more than 20% of the entire city population passing through every single day. Actual peak usage never exceeded 8,000 daily passengers, even during World War II mobilization. The building featured a 212-foot clock tower, marble floors, bronze fixtures, and a waiting room with a ceiling height of 40 feet. The official explanation: civic pride and competitive positioning among railroad companies. But Worcester wasn't unique. Dozens of American cities with populations under 200,000 built railway stations sized for cities 5 times larger. And the pattern wasn't limited to stations. The storm drain systems installed in American cities between 1880 and 1920 present perhaps the clearest example. Chicago's deep tunnel system, begun in 1887, was designed to handle storm water runoff for a city of 5 million people. Chicago's population in 1887 was 1 million. The tunnels weren't needed at design capacity until the 1950s, 60 years later. Boston's sewer system, installed between 1876 and 1884, used brick-lined tunnels large enough to drive carriages through. The diameter specifications called for 12-foot tunnels in sections serving neighborhoods with fewer than 5,000 residents. Modern engineering standards would recommend 4-foot pipes for equivalent areas. When you examine the construction records, the ones that survived, you find something peculiar: very little iteration. These systems weren't built, tested, expanded, and refined. They were installed at scale, immediately, as if following a template that already existed. The same phenomenon appears in Britain's water infrastructure. The Thames Embankment project, completed in 1870, created a sewage system for London using a network of tunnels that remain in use today, largely unchanged. The main interceptor sewers were built with capacity for a population of 8 million. London's population in 1870 was 3.8 million. The brickwork was laid in English bond pattern with precision that modern masons struggle to replicate. The gradient calculations, essential for gravity-fed sewage flow, were accurate to within millimeters across distances of several miles. Joseph Bazalgette, the chief engineer, is credited with this precision. The official record says he used manual surveying instruments, theodolites and spirit levels. Yet the cumulative error rate in the system is lower than what's typically achievable with those tools across such distances. Several sections of the tunnel run beneath the Thames itself, requiring calculations of soil pressure, water table depth, and structural load that wouldn't appear in formal engineering education until decades later. This isn't conspiracy. It's technical analysis published in civil engineering reviews. The observations exist. The explanations remain vague. Now extend the pattern to electrical infrastructure. The first electrical grids appeared in the 1880s. Thomas Edison's Pearl Street Station in New York, opened in 1882, could generate 600 kilowatts, enough to power roughly 7,200 light bulbs. The distribution system it connected to, however, was built with capacity for 10 times that load. The underground conduits, the copper cabling, the junction boxes, all oversized for actual demand. Within 3 years, dozens of American cities had similar systems. Not experimental installations, full municipal grids. The speed of adoption defies the typical pattern of technological diffusion. Most new technologies take decades to spread geographically. Electrical grids appeared nearly simultaneously in cities separated by thousands of miles, each built to similar specifications, each with excess capacity. The conventional explanation cites competitive pressure and entrepreneurial vision. But consider the knowledge transfer problem. In 1885, there were perhaps 24 people in the entire United States with practical experience building electrical distribution systems. Yet between 1885 and 1890, over 200 cities installed grids. The engineering firms responsible employed thousands of workers who somehow possessed the specialized knowledge required to install high-voltage systems safely and efficiently. Where did that knowledge come from? How did it distribute so quickly? The historical record suggests training programs, apprenticeships, and knowledge sharing among engineering firms. But the documentation is thin. What remains are the systems themselves, and they show remarkable consistency in design philosophy, component selection, and installation methodology across vast geographic distances. This isn't limited to electrical systems. The standardization of railroad track gauge provides another example. By 1890, virtually all American railways used a gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches. This standardization happened despite the fact that dozens of different companies built the railways, often in direct competition with each other. The coordination required to achieve this uniformity, absent any federal mandate until much later, is rarely examined in historical accounts. It's presented as natural evolution, market efficiency, and practical necessity. Yet when you look at the timeline, standardization occurred faster than economic coordination theories would predict. Companies that had already invested heavily in non-standard gauge infrastructure abandoned those investments and rebuilt to standard gauge within a span of just a few years during the 1870s and 1880s. The financial loss was enormous. The justification was interoperability. But the speed suggests something more organized than simple market forces. The same pattern appears in architectural standardization. Between 1890 and 1920, public buildings across America and Britain began to share design elements with striking consistency. Neoclassical facades, specific ceiling heights, particular window proportions, identical door frame specifications. This wasn't stylistic influence. The measurements were exact. A door frame in a courthouse in Ohio matched the dimensions of a door frame in a post office in Oregon down to the quarter inch. The official explanation: pattern books and architectural catalogs. But pattern books explain aesthetics, not specifications. They don't account for structural elements, load-bearing walls, foundation depths, ventilation shaft placement, that also show cross-continental consistency. And beneath all of this, a persistent question: who paid for it? Municipal bonds and private investment, according to the financial records. But when you trace the money, the sources become murky. Investment syndicates with overlapping board members. Bonding houses that appear in records for a few years then vanish. Capital flows that don't align with contemporary economic conditions. The infrastructure exists. The financial trail is incomplete. What remains is a pattern of construction that suggests coordination, knowledge, and resources exceeding what the official narrative of 19th century development typically describes. Whether this reflects inheritance, convergence, or something else entirely becomes the question that defines interpretation. The word Tartaria appears on European maps beginning in the 13th century. It referred to the vast region of Central Asia controlled by Mongol successor states, the lands beyond the Caspian, stretching east toward China. The name derives from Tatar, the Turkic peoples who dominated the area after the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire. For cartographers, Tartaria was a geographic placeholder, a way of labeling territory they knew existed but couldn't map with precision. By the 18th century, as Russian expansion brought the region under direct observation, the term faded from official use. It remained only in historical texts, a relic of medieval geography. Then, sometime in the early 2000s, something changed. Online researchers began examining old maps and noticed the scale of the territory labeled Tartaria. They observed architectural similarities between buildings in Russia, Central Asia, and Western Europe. They noted the timing of construction booms following major disasters. And they began asking questions that mainstream historical scholarship hadn't prioritized. Why does so much 19th century infrastructure seem built for populations that didn't yet exist? Why does the architectural and engineering knowledge appear so evenly distributed? Why do the official explanations rely so heavily on foresight and optimism during periods of economic collapse? From these questions emerged multiple interpretive frameworks. The first framework suggests literal inheritance. It proposes that the infrastructure we attribute to the 19th century actually predates it, that it survived from an earlier, more technologically advanced civilization that official history has either forgotten or deliberately obscured. In this interpretation, the construction documented in 19th century records was actually restoration or repurposing of existing structures. The over-engineering wasn't visionary planning, it was simply the scale at which the original builders worked. This framework treats Tartaria as a historical entity that controlled much of Eurasia and parts of North America before a cataclysmic event, often identified as the Tambora eruption and the subsequent year without a summer, caused its collapse. The survivors in this view lacked the knowledge to maintain or replicate what they inherited, so they adapted it as best they could and created historical narratives that positioned themselves as the builders. The evidence cited includes architectural anomalies, infrastructure oversizing, and gaps in construction documentation. The challenges include the absence of direct textual records from this proposed civilization and the difficulty of reconciling this narrative with established archaeological and historical evidence. The second framework suggests parallel development. It argues that multiple societies across Eurasia developed similar technologies and architectural approaches independently, driven by common environmental pressures and shared mathematical principles. In this interpretation, the consistency in design isn't evidence of a single source but rather of convergent evolution, different cultures arriving at similar solutions to similar problems. This framework points to the global nature of engineering knowledge, the existence of trade routes that facilitated idea exchange, and the tendency of large-scale infrastructure to follow certain optimal forms regardless of who builds it. The appearance of coordination, in this view, results from practical necessity rather than centralized planning. The evidence cited includes documented cases of independent invention, the mathematical constraints that limit engineering options, and the historical record of knowledge transfer through trade and migration. The challenges include explaining the speed of technological diffusion and the precision of standardization across vast distances. The third framework suggests administrative continuity. It proposes that the infrastructure wasn't built by the nations whose names appear in the historical record, but rather by a less visible administrative structure that operated across national boundaries, a network of engineering societies, financial interests, and bureaucratic systems that transcended the political map. In this interpretation, Tartaria becomes a metaphor for this shadow infrastructure. Not a nation-state in the conventional sense, but an organizational layer that managed large-scale projects according to its own logic, using official governments as financing mechanisms. The over-engineering reflected the priorities of this network rather than the needs of local populations. The evidence cited includes the pattern of financial flows, the consistency of administrative procedures across different nations, and the existence of international engineering organizations that operated semi-independently of governments. The challenges include limited documentation of such coordination and the difficulty of maintaining institutional secrecy across centuries. 3 frameworks. 3 different relationships to the evidence. None provable by the standard of contemporary historical methodology. None dismissible by simple appeal to conventional narratives. And this brings us back to 1816. The year without a summer ended. Temperatures normalized. Agriculture recovered. Populations began growing again. And within that same decade, construction began on infrastructure that wouldn't reach design capacity for 50 to 100 years. Maybe it was visionary planning. Maybe it was inherited capacity. Maybe it was administrative coordination that transcended the political divisions of the era. The evidence doesn't resolve the question. It invites examination. The canals are still there. The railways still run. The water systems still function. The electrical grids still deliver power. Much of the infrastructure built during that period remains in use, largely unmodified, more than a century later. That durability itself is unusual. Most structures require significant maintenance or replacement within 50 years. These have lasted double or triple that span. You can visit them. You can measure them. You can examine the construction techniques, the material choices, the engineering specifications. The observations remain accessible to anyone willing to look. What changes is interpretation, the framework through which we understand what we're seeing. And interpretation always reflects the questions we're willing to ask as much as the evidence available to answer them. The term Tartaria has become shorthand for a set of observations about 19th century infrastructure that don't fit comfortably within standard historical narratives. Whether that label points toward something genuinely overlooked or simply represents pattern recognition applied too liberally remains contested. What isn't contested is the infrastructure itself. It was built. It exceeded contemporary need. It displays characteristics that challenge simple explanations. And it continues to function, largely as designed, more than a century after its construction. The rest is interpretation, and interpretation requires each observer to decide which questions matter most, which evidence carries weight, and which explanatory frameworks align with their understanding of how history works. The structures remain. The questions remain. The conversation continues.